What's up, fellas? In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the Houston Rockets. What's the future of this team? Where can they possibly go from here? How should they go about what's pretty clearly at this point a rebuild situation? They've lost a ton of games in a row. Christian Wood has been hurt. And this is such an interesting roster to look at. It's an interesting team from like a future assets, draft pick standpoint. A couple of different, directions they could go in here, and that's what we're going to be talking about in today's video. But really quickly, before we get started, if you enjoy content like this, then consider subscribing. I upload twice a day, every single day on this channel, so it's the most consistent NBA content on YouTube. If you're new here, by the way, what's up? My name is Tucker. You can also leave a like rating on the videos as well if you're enjoying the content, and check me out at various socials at the bottom of the screen and a link tree down in the description below. With those things said, let's go ahead and get started and talk about the Houston Rockets. So this is a team that, has had arguably the worst year in the league from like a player happiness standpoint. Like, you start off the year and James Harden is basically not giving any effort. His trade request is hanging over the entire team. Then the roster completely changes midseason. Then Christian Wood gets hurt. Now you've lost a ton of games in a row. And it's pretty clear that like nobody wants to be there. And the guy I feel the worst for, honestly, is the new head coach. Like, he's had to go through so much in the first 4 months of his head coaching tenure. And I feel like he's handled it well, but right now this is a group that just is not, they're just not locked in. They're not focused. They don't want to be there. And I honestly don't blame them. But when you're looking at the future of this roster, you could argue it's the most interesting possible rebuild in the NBA. The amount of different scenarios here is kind of mind-boggling. I'm going to lay out what I would prefer to do, and then we'll talk about all the different variations of that. So as you look at their roster as a whole, and then we'll talk about the draft pick stuff, which gets honestly even more complicated. There's one piece here that you want to keep from a value standpoint, from a contract standpoint, from a youth, skills, production, everything. Assuming Christian Wood comes back fully healthy, which is every indication that he should, Christian Wood is the guy here. I mean, he's 25 years old. He signed to a fair contract for the rest of this year as well as 2 more, and has proven himself to be a really, really good player. And, him getting hurt has kind of precipitated, this recent slide for them. After the Harden trade, they were playing pretty well. And again, assuming Christian Wood comes back fully healthy, I mean, this is a borderline all-star caliber guy on a really, really fair contract. So that's the guy you want to keep. Now, when you look at the rest of the roster, you're not really sure what else to make of it. John Wall is there. He's been fine. The contract is obviously significant. Eric Gordon is there, who's signed the longest term out of anybody on this roster. The Oladipo stuff we'll talk about, as we talked about yesterday. And then there's some other young guys. I've always kind of liked Daniel House, but I wouldn't even qualify him as like a young player anymore. He's 27, 28. He is what he is at this point. They traded for Kevin Porter Jr., who, if he can get his life together, should be an interesting young guy. I mean, maybe you're a big fan of like Jayshawn Tate. I don't know, but there's just not a lot going for you here, right? So here's what I would do. If you just gave me this roster and you said, just put this in a 2K simulation and sim through it and just do what you would do in 2 hours. How would you make this happen? Okay. I would build around Christian Wood. I think Christian Wood is the guy you want to keep. I would try and get any kind of value out of primarily PJ Tucker. I think that some kind of veteran team, whether it's Brooklyn or otherwise, is going to see value in PJ Tucker. You shop him around, whether it's to the Celtics for their trade exception, whether it's to Utah to try and add a little bit more depth. Any contender, I think, would be interested in PJ Tucker. You get some kind of value out of him, whether it's a late first, whether it's a couple of seconds, whether it's an interesting young player, whatever the case may be, because he's going to the end of the year regardless. I'm not losing that value for nothing. Honestly, at this point, I would also heavily explore my trade options as it relates to Victor Oladipo. I don't think that after, the year that this has been, where Oladipo changes team, shows up to Houston, they're one of the worst teams in the league from the moment he gets there, from a record standpoint, the fit between him and John Wall, I find it unlikely that without a max contract offer to Victor Oladipo, I find it unlikely that he's going to stay in Houston beyond the season. And I personally don't want to pay Victor Oladipo a max. So I'm aggressively looking at trade options for him. If I'm getting completely awful offers, okay, then maybe I roll the dice, see if I can re-sign him for like 25 a year at the end of the year, assuming that he plays well enough to justify that salary. But right now, I mean, those are the 2 guys that I'm aggressively shopping. Let's just say you get value out of those 2 guys. You go into the offseason and you've got, a little bit less than $20 million in salary cap space, which isn't a bad number. For me personally, I'm taking flyers on 1-year deals. I'm taking flyers on guys that are a little bit younger, could potentially be brought in for value. I'm looking for the next Christian Wood. I'm looking for the guy that I can bring in, whether it be on a huge 1-year deal to kind of prove themselves, or on a Christian Wood type deal that is, you're making 12 or 13 a year, but I know that you're going to be a good young player moving forward. It's one of those two. It's either the veteran or the guy you think you can, be a good player. And it's all one year deals, because I'm not under no impression that, especially if Oladipo's gone, the Rockets are going to be a good team next year. Like, I'm understanding that this is going to take a little while to really, improve this team in a significant way, in a way that actually makes a lot of sense, right? So from there, I'm going to try and pump up the value of John Wall. I'm going to try and pump up the value of Eric Gordon. Maybe even Daniel House as well would potentially be on the trade market. At this point, Wall would be on a 1-and-1 deal, making 44 and then 47 with a player option for the second season. Eric Gordon is signed for the next couple of seasons, but is a perimeter scorer that, assuming he's still playing well, can shoot, should have some value. Maybe he won't, but again, I'm shopping those two guys. I'm trying to get value out of either of them. Let's just go ahead and assume that I move Gordon, but I don't move John Wall. As we then go into the following offseason, there's a couple of things to look at. It kind of depends on what happened with the guys I signed to 1-year deals. Maybe I got value out of them. Christian Wood would now be going into a contract season in the 2022 offseason. He'd have 1 year left. John Wall presumably opts into his player option for $47 million in the 2022 offseason as well. Again, keep in mind, Eric Gordon is off the books at this point. And, whatever other players I have here, we'll talk about the draft pick stuff in a little bit. That's kind of how I would play the salaries. As you get to 2022, you don't have Eric Gordon, you don't have Victor Oladipo, but you got value in exchange for them, whether that be players or picks. And then you go into 2022-23 season with John Wall as a huge expiring contract. Worst case, even if he's not a very good player at that point, that's a huge amount of salary cap relief. Maybe you're able to trade him at that point because he is an expiring contract. And assuming Christian Wood is still playing well, you're looking to re-sign him as well. That's your big free agency summer in the summer of 2023. You should have significant cap space. You should have Christian Wood as a building block player. And hopefully by this point, you've gotten some other assets around Christian Wood as well. Because again, keep in mind, all of this other stuff does revolve around the draft picks and around the future assets, because as convoluted and as complicated as it is, when you go and look at the entire page, there is a significant amount of draft capital here in Houston, whether it be the multiple first-round picks that they have this season from, I believe, it's like Portland. It's not Portland and Detroit, is it? It's some combination of teams where they don't have full control over their own pick, but they have control over two other teams' picks. And then obviously they've got all the Brooklyn picks moving forward, but they owe some stuff to Oklahoma City. It gets very weird very quickly. I'm honestly not going to take the time here and really get bogged down in all of the details. But the point is, you've got some assets here. You've got some moves you can make in the draft. Maybe you go all in and you try and move up in the 2021 draft to get a player that's really, really good and fits well with Christian Wood at the top of the class. Maybe you save those picks for a potential star trade once you do clear some salary cap space. But for me, it's all about Christian Wood's the one guy I want to keep. Everybody else is available. PJ Tucker and Victor Oladipo this year, Eric Gordon the following, John Wall the year after that. And again, you're adding young pieces all the time. I think the coaching staff is fine. It's a little bit tough to evaluate, their performance this year, given, how weird of a year it is. It's a new front office, it's a new coaching staff. Give them an opportunity to build this group up with young guys, with Christian Wood, and just continue to add assets with the understanding that it's going to be probably 2 years minimum before you're a good team again. I don't think that the correct move would be to go out, and keep Victor Oladipo and try and add pieces just to be a middling team. Now, that's kind of my plan. That's my, very, very surface level kind of plan and idea here for Houston moving forward. Now, a couple variations of this would be you keep Oladipo. You think you run it back next year with a healthier John Wall and a healthy Victor Oladipo and Christian Wood, and you're like, wow, we can be the 8th seed or the 7th seed, the 6th seed next year. That's really interesting. That's certainly an option, and maybe that helps the value of someone like John Wall or someone like Eric Gordon to be able to trade them down the road. And maybe Oladipo is a really, really good player. You sign him to a deal worth $25 a year. He actually decides to re-sign in Houston, and that's a decent group moving forward. I personally would rather have the ceiling of possibly, being more than the 6th seed in the West, 2 years from now, rather than, making the playoffs and losing in the first round for 2 years. But that's just my personal preference. The other option here would be to just basically flip the Harden trade, but for Beal. So like you trade Oladipo, whether it be a sign and trade this offseason or before the deadline this year, and those draft picks, and you try and go out and get Bradley Beal or some other, potential star that's on the market. I find that unlikely, again, given how poorly they're playing right now. But if you're talking about all the different variations of how this Rockets rebuild would go, I think that is at least something to keep an eye on, whether that be this year with Oladipo or, with Wall down the road or with Eric Gordon's salary or whatever the case may be, because of all the future picks from Brooklyn that they do have. But at the end of the day, Houston is in this very odd middle ground between having all this flexibility from a draft pick standpoint, but also being tied down a little bit by some of their contracts, whether that's the impending free agency of Victor Oladipo, the big contract of John Wall, the long-term contract of Eric Gordon. But, from a positive standpoint, they do have assets. They do have tradable players. Oladipo, Tucker, Gordon, Wall down the road. And then all these future assets as well. So it's not all doom and gloom. They're certainly in a better spot now that they have traded James Harden. And at least they do have the Christian Wood piece. If they didn't sign Christian Wood this offseason, this would look much, much worse. But I'm all in. I'm a believer in Christian Wood. And so that piece certainly does help them. Let me know down in the comment section below what you would do if you were in charge in Houston. How would you try and fix this team? How would you attempt to rebuild this team? Let me know down in the comment section below. But yeah, that is going to be the end of the second video of the day. And I thank you guys very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on the screen. Hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your day, and I will see you all next time.